Yogah Karmasu Kaushalam.
Looking into languages in contact as a phenomenon. Now, when two languages are in contact, there is a contact between two cultures too. At the linguistic level, this process is called bilingualism, and at the cultural level, biculturalism or acculturation, that is the process of becoming adapted to a new or different culture with more or less advanced patterns in the mutual influence of different cultures in close contact. And this plays an important part in second language acquisition. Acquisition of any language is very important. We shouldn't stop to learning. And in order to acquire any language, we should be well aware of the culture and the society from where the language is coming. However, if that does not happen, then an individual ends up learning and not acquiring the second language. We must remember at the same time that language is an integral part of enculturation, that is, the process causing us to adapt to the prevailing cultural patterns of our society. Enculturation actually looks into two major aspects. Language is a part of culture, so much so that the two cannot be separated. Language is the medium through which the users explore and manipulate the socio-cultural environment. Now let us move towards bilingualism and biculturalism. Hall's categorization of formal, informal, and technical levels of cultures is useful in understanding the distinctions very clearly and specifically. First of all, looking into formal learning. It is through observation and admonition, using authority. Informal learning through nonverbal channels of communication, unwritten conventions, indirect responses, etc. Technical learning through rules at the conscious level, as in learning etiquette. Bilingualism is a language situation wherein a person can use or is capable of using two languages with equal or nearly equal facility. Coordinate bilinguals are the people who know two languages and use them or are capable of using them but only slightly better than monolinguals. Subordinate bilinguals are people who know two languages and use or are capable of using L2 with varying degrees of proficiency. Incipient bilinguals are the people who can use or are capable of using two languages with a near perfect mastery of two systems, which is very rare. Multilingualism is a language situation wherein a person can use or is capable of several languages with equal or nearly equal facility. A multilingual is also called a polyglot. That is a word formed from poly for many and glot for language, because gloss used as a synecdoche in glossary also means language. Moving towards other important aspect of the combination of language, society and culture is code switching. It is an instance wherein a speaker or a writer who is a bilingual or a multilingual switches from one language to another, and this happens when the speaker and the listener belong to different language communities. The other aspect of it, which is slightly different, is code mixing. It is an instance wherein a speaker who is bilingual or a multilingual mixes one language with another quite unconsciously. So we have to move towards code mixing in order to acquire second language. Now let us look into code switching as a communicative strategy. Socially determined situations are very important. For example, the ability to use one's language correctly in a variety of socially determined situations is as much and as central a part of linguistic competence as the ability to produce grammatically well formed sentences. The actual product is a rule governed realization of a complex network of situationally and culturally determined aspects. Looking into role relationships, types, etc. Participants, those are the addressers and the addressee. Their socio psychological behavior is important. Their mood and relative position is important. Socio-cultural setting is very important. Its distinguishing features, however, are topics of discourse. Looking into the situational shifts of it. Members of social networks sharing a linguistic repertoire must know when to shift from one variety to another. What are the consequences of a shift? A shift in situation may require a shift in language variety. A shift in language variety may signal a shift in the relationship between co-members of a social network, or a shift in privacy or locale of their interaction. Code switching cannot simply be a matter of free individual choice. It is a verbal strategy. It is a plan for directing large scale operations of maneuvering things into the most advantageous positions. Used by speakers as much creative artists do in switching styles and levels. And this is dependent on topical and situational features giving rise to it. Moving towards India now. English has been, until very recently, the language of instruction, administration, technical education, etc. It is even now used as a medium of instruction in higher education and technical education. It is the language of participation in all India seminars, workshops, conferences, symposia, etc. It is the language of our textbooks, reference materials. So it has become a very integral part of the learning process that we go through as we grow up. Indian bilinguals are to be looked into now. English using bilinguals in India keep on switching from one or more Indian languages to English according to different performative occasions and the roles they are playing, especially while dealing with issues in technical education. This kind of registered bilingualism may be labeled as registral bilingualism. Now let us look into some features of code switching. Those are intra-language and interlanguage switching and are sociolinguistic universals as well. Code switchers use English words even if equivalents exist in Hindi or their L1. Some formulaic expressions in English are so deeply embedded in urban bilingual societies that they come out naturally in informal conversations. For example, taunt as a word is English, but it is now used by almost everyone, even in rural areas, as a word that is very much Gujarati. And the meaning is also understood when it is spoken, in spite of the fact that the users of that particular word or that particular language for that matter are not formally trained in using English language. That is why culture and society become very important in learning language. Educated speakers tend to switch freely from one language to another. Code switching is context governed. It is directed by emotional and intellectual attachment to the code. And that is why code switching has to be imbibed, or we have to get acculturated to a particular language using community so that language comes naturally to us. looking into the linguistic and social inequality that we come across sometimes. There are three major problems. Absence of language planning is one of them. That is, lack of political will to implement and organize policies and programs, lack of coordination among various agencies, that is, the government at the center and the state universities, the directorates, and other agencies working in the area of language teaching and language planning. Second important thing is language planning. According to Crystal, in the year 1980, and I quote, language planning is a term used in social linguistics to refer to a systematic attempt to solve the communication problems of community by studying the various languages or dialects it uses and developing a realistic policy concerning the selection and use of different languages. MacArthur, in the year 1992, is more specific when he says that it is, and I quote, the attempt made to control the use, status, and structure of a language policy developed by a government or other authority, unquote, in any given country for that matter. It is usually the government of the day that makes the decision either on the basis of experts' advice or on its own without seeking such an advice. And in the event of its seeking such advice, it may or may not take note of it. For a government in a democratic setup such as ours is voted to power by a popular mandate. A language policy, according to Bell in their 1981, is quite clearly as to which language will be A. the official language, B. used for what purpose, C. taught and at what level, and D. taught to what category of learners and for what duration of time. The policy decided upon may not be a practical one, or it may be aimed at satisfying a particular political constituency due to the pressure brought to bear upon the government. For instance, the announcement that Government of India was planning to add Bodo language to the list of languages in the 8th schedule of Constitution of India was apparently made in view of the Bodo movement. Now, looking into four major issues. How many languages should be learnt or taught and in what order? What should be the medium of instruction? Should it be the same for all subjects in the curriculum? How should we help learners to move from dialects to the standard variety? Should we have the same programs for the privileged as well as the weaker and the deprived sections of the community? These are some of the questions that we need to look into when we plan a language curriculum. Looking into the parameters of language planning. First is selection, that is specification of a particular language variety. Then the second one is codification. For the purpose of stabilizing this variety, some agency produces reference materials, etc., for the purpose of teaching and learning. Third is acceptance, that is, once the codification receives popular acceptance, it becomes a symbol of patriotism and unity. Fourth is elaboration of function, that is, the expansion of language functions, assigning of new roles, modernizations, etc. Moving towards problems in the process. The first problem, that is, can languages and varieties be standardized? How can languages and varieties be used for exploitation and manipulation by interested groups? Are standard languages and varieties unreal and pathological since they lack vitality, diversity, and creativity? A review of history of the times before the British colonized India, we were a nation divided against ourselves. There were small and big princely states in the country. Each of these had a language of its own because the language of the rulers became the language of the masses. There was no nation in the sense in which we understand the term today. Hence, India of those times never really had the common language accessible to its masses. Some classical languages thrived due to the princely patronage, as was the case with Sanskrit, which remained a common medium for a very long time in India or in Indian history, but only for the learned class of our people. With the British colonial rule came English, a sort of lingua franca. But true to the Machiavellian dictum, it was restricted in access to the educated few. There is this concept of language deficit, which is very interesting when we look into language, society, and culture. Language deficit assumes that the working class children do not do well at school because they suffer from cognitive deficiencies in the absence of the elaborated code. They cannot organize their experience and interpret the world the way the middle class children do. That is what we all the time feel when we go into the rural sections of our country, and the learners who come to us to learn English are not very well aware of the culture and the social context of English, and therefore they fail to acquire English language.